Hello everyone. Ciao Ermanno.
Hi, ciao.
Welcome to this meetup, online meetup. I'm going to share the slide, Ermanno.
Yeah, sure.
Ok.
Il meetup di oggi lo faremo un po' in italiano e un po' in inglese, nel senso che abbiamo un ospite straniero, quindi le slide, la sua presentazione sarà in inglese, però l'introduzione comunque per tutti voi la facciamo sia in italiano che in inglese, poi procediamo. Vai Luciano.
Okay. So, firstly, I want to ask to say thank you to Fervento that help us to organize the online event. So we have also Hermano that works in Fervento and is a
It's a
system
pleasure.
integrator. And we are really thank you, Fermento, for this. And so, Hermano.
Ok, quindi I will go first in Italian for all the audience, ok? So abbiamo un meetup al mese e tendenzialmente l'ultima settimana del mese. Poi abbiamo diciamo, a volte anche quelli lì online, come è il caso di oggi, quindi ogni tanto potete partecipare anche online. Di solito proviamo a fare quelli i meetup sia in persona che online, nello stesso, anche se sono in persona, anche online. E gli ospiti, diciamo, sono tanti benvenuti, anche stranieri, anche dall'estero, e soprattutto, diciamo, siamo disponibili a ospitare chiunque voglia ovviamente presentarsi per, diciamo, presentare le loro idee e soprattutto le cose nuove, diciamo, che vedono. L'obiettivo della community è stare insieme. Quindi, per l'audience straniero, ora ve lo dico in inglese. Usually we have one meetup a month that is held in person or online. And of course, we try also for the in-person events to have streaming for the online sessions. And we would like to welcome all of you to present and participate in the community, even if you are from far away or abroad. And of course, we can do that thanks to the streaming sessions and all the all the networks that we have. So that's why we already have here a presentation from a foreign GDE, and I will then present him in a little bit. But first, let's go through what we are organizing for the next conference. As you know, we organized in last December a great conference in Rome, and we are planning, of course, to do that again. We are going to decide the final date soon, but potentially that will be in December, even though we will confirm, of course, share that on our social media, and of course, you will get all the information. Start preparing for the call for paper and call for presentations, because we will probably open that very soon in the next weeks, and we will have that open for a little bit of time, so everyone can participate and present what they would like to, of course, try to submit to the conference. If you would like to start a conversation with us far ahead, even before the call for paper is started, you can write an email to ngronconf@gmail.com, and we will sure reply to that. As I said, the idea is to have a conference in October. Okay, and again, sponsorship is the way we go and fund the conference, because all of us do that. I mean, on our spare time and for our, because we really enjoy the community and creating very, very good content for the people. So the sponsors are the fuel that we have. And if you know who can potentially do a sponsorship, or if your company is interested in doing a sponsorship, start writing to us at ngronconf@gmail.com. And we will go through that. As I mentioned, if you would like to submit a talk for the next meetup, you can write to us as the same as the email Angular Roma, so Angular Rome @gmail.com. And even if your company is able to host us for an event, we will tend to go to companies and host the event, at their place. Quindi se avete, diciamo, la possibilità di ospitare anche un evento nelle vostre aziende, noi siamo molto più che contenti di farlo con voi, e ovviamente potete scriverci a questo indirizzo angularroma@gmail.com per, diciamo, organizzare un evento insieme. Okay, now we will go through the real content of the presentation. And so thank you, Marko, for being here today. And today's talk will be about NgRx, and it will be held by Marko Stanimirović, who is a GDE in Angular and also is a member of the core team of NgRx. So we will hear directly from the voice of one of the core developer what's NgRx about, the core principles, and of course where it is heading and going to. So Marko, please, the stage is yours, and very, very thank you to be here. So yeah,
thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, that's a pleasure.
Welcome, Marko. Yeah. See you later.
See you.
Yeah, bye. Your stage.
So hello everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about NgRx core principles, and then we will also take a look at the new features that are introduced in the last few releases. Before we start, let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Marko Stanimirović. I work as senior front-end engineer at JobCloud. I'm a core member of NgRx team, GD in Angular, and I'm also organizing Angular Belgrade meetups. The first question for today is, what is NgRx? We can think of NgRx as a framework or group of libraries for building reactive applications in Angular. And it provides different types of libraries or packages. It provides state, data, view, and tooling packages. If we talk about state packages, this group is without any doubt the most popular one. So here we have NgRx store package that is used for the global state management. We also have NgRx effect that can help us to manage side effects in our global side effects in our application in a reactive way. Besides that, we also have NgRx router store package that is basically a connector between NgRx store and Angular router. There is also NgRx entity package. NgRx entity contains a set of utilities or helpers for entity management. And the last and the latest one from this group is NgRx Component Store. NgRx Component Store is completely independent from NgRx Store. It's primarily used for the local state management or state management at the component level, but it can be, by the way, also used as a global state management solution because it's basically an alternative to the service with the subject approach. We also have data packages. Here we have only one package, NgRx Data. NgRx Data is initially implemented by John Papa and Ward Bell, and it's part of the NgRx repository, NgRx platform repository for a long time right now. It contains, it actually wraps a core NgRx logic and exposes services for the state management. It's useful. It can reduce some repetitive code, but it also has some limitations. Next group are view packages. Here we also have only one. It's called NgRx Component. NgRx Component currently contains two declarables. It contains push pipe and let directive, and they are used for rendering observable values in Angular templates in a performant way. Next group are tooling packages. The first one is NgRx Store DevTools. This is basically a connector between NgRx Store and Redux DevTools browser extension. We also have NgRx Schematics. You can probably guess based on its name by using NgRx Schematics. We can generate some NgRx boilerplate. And the latest package from this group is also NgRx ESLint plugin. NgRx ESLint plugin contains a set of ESLint rules that can help us to apply best practices when using NgRx libraries in our applications. And let's now talk about the most popular package about NgRx Store. NgRx Store is inspired by Redux, and it's powered by RxJS. I mean, it's currently powered by RxJS. We will see what will happen in the future with signal integration in Angular. Let's quickly show the diagram to see how NgRx works from the, let's say, abstract perspective. So we have component on one side and NgRx store on the other side. NgRx store is a singleton in our application, and it contains a global state of our application. So when some action happens in our component, we will dispatch when some event happens, we will dispatch an action. Action can be further handled by the reducer. Reducer is a pure function that accepts a current state and dispatched action and returns a new global state as a result. When we update the state to get the state slices in our component, we usually use selectors to select state slices from the NgRx store. And yeah, the best way to learn NgRx as any other technology or library or framework is through the example. So let's now try to create an application by using NgRx, and this is how it will look like. So it's, as you can see, it's very simple. We have only one page with search bar, with search button. When search button is clicked, we want to search musicians by their name, and in the end, you can see we want to display a list of musicians. Let's first define actions for this page. So what we can do, we can now identify events that can happen on our page. The first event that we will have is opened event. So this event, this action should be dispatched when this page is opened or initialized. As you can see, we are using, to create an action, we are using create action function from NgRx store package. It accepts action type as an input argument. Action type needs to be unique for each action, and to define action type, we usually use something that is called source event pattern. So inside of the square brackets, we put the source of each action, and the second part is event name. Source in this example will be musicians page, because this action will be dispatched from the musicians page. The next action that we will have here, the next event, will be query change. So we want to dispatch an action when search button is clicked to filter our musicians list by query. So in this case, we are using, again, create action function. Action type will be musicians page query changed, but here we have one additional thing, namely with actions we are also able to pass a payload when we dispatch action. In this case, we want to pass current value of query when we dispatch this action. To do that, we can pass a second argument to the create action function. As you can see here, I'm using props. That is also part of the NgRx store public API, and as a generic argument, we can specify the type of our payload to have everything strongly typed, of course. Also here, we will have another group of actions. They are called musicians API actions, and here we want to also dispatch actions when we load something, when we fetch our data from the API. So in this case, we will have musicians loaded success action that should be dispatched when we receive a response from the API that musicians are successfully loaded. And this action, as you can see, will have a payload, which is a list of or array of musicians. We always need to cover the error case, of course, so we will also have musicians loaded failure in case our API return error response. Let's now see how we can create a reducer, the second main building block of NgRx. So in this particular case, we first need to define a feature state for our musicians. So in this case, we can recognize what are state slices based on the picture. So you can see that we will have an array of musicians. We will also have a query as a state musicians feature state slice. And the thing that we cannot see in this picture is loading property. So we want to display a loading spinner until we load our musicians collection. And yeah, that's it. The next thing is we need to define initial state. Musicians will be empty array. IsLoading will be initially set to false, and query will be an empty string in the beginning. And then we can create a reducer. To create a reducer, we can use createReducer function from the NgRx store package. This function accepts initial state as first and sequence of case reducers as rest arguments. Each case reducer, as you can see here, is created by using on function, and this is actually the place where we want to define how to change our feature state when some action is dispatched. In this case, when opened action is dispatched, we want to set loading to true, to display a loading spinner on our page. You can notice one thing here. We have immutable state updates. Immutable state updates are important for several reasons. The first one is, the most important one, of course, is in performance. With immutable state updates, we can turn on push change detection strategy in our Angular application and get some benefits from the performance. So our application will be, our components actually will be change detected or re-rendered only when their inputs are changed. The second thing is, with immutable state updates, we can also easily track state history in our application and easily find potential bugs. Here we will have two more case reducer. The second one is, so we want to update the value of query when query change action is dispatched. And by the way, you can see inside of the on function, as a last argument, we are specifying updater. Updater is a function that accepts current state as a first and action as a second argument and returns updated version of the feature state. So in case of query change action as a second argument, we will get dispatch action. We want to only take the payload, so we can destructure query and update our musician's feature state. For musicians loaded success, we will also again take the array of musicians, update our feature state, and also we want to set isLoading flag to false. The next thing, we created actions, we defined reducers, but somehow we need to provide our store, we need to register our reducers, so NgRx will be aware that they exist and it will run them under the hood every time when some action is dispatched. To do that, in standalone application, we can use, inside of the Bootstrap application, as a second argument, we can pass a config, as you probably know if you use standalone Angular so far. Inside of the providers array, we can use provide store function. That is basically where, if you work with modules before, it works in the same way as store module.for root. So what it will do under the hood, it will provide a store service and register root reducers. In this case, our root reducer will be musician's reducer that handles musician feature state. So we can import, for example, here by using named import, we can import everything as from musician reducer file and register our musician's reducer by using the musician's feature name. Another option that can be also used in lazy loading features is to use provide state. So we can use provide store instead of store module.for root, and to use provide state instead of store module.for feature. So provide state accepts a feature key as first and feature reducer as a second argument. Third main building block in NgRx are selectors. And let's again go back to our application and see what selectors we need here and how we can create them. So the first thing that we need for each feature state in NgRx is to create a feature selector. In this case, Nemo feature selector will be select musician state, and we are creating feature selector by using create feature selector function that is also part of the NgRx store public API. It accepts a feature name or feature key as an input argument. If you remember, when we registered our reducer here, we used musicians feature key for the musicians reducer and musicians feature state. So we are using the same feature key here to select the entire musicians feature state object. Then we usually create a selector for each feature state properties. In our case, for musician state, we had 3 properties: array of musicians, isLoading flag, and query. So we'll create select musicians, select isLoading, and select query selectors. In this case, we will use create selector function. So with create selector, as you can see, we are able to compose 1 or more selectors, and inside of the projector function, we can define specific logic, what should be returned as a result of that selector. Create selector function provides one more benefit, namely it returns mem-wise selector, which means that in this, for example, specific case, projector function won't be re-executed if their input arguments are not changed, which can bring some performance benefits in our application. So projector function will be actually re-executed only when its input arguments are changed. If input arguments are not changed, it will return a cached value. And the last selector that we want to create here is select filter musicians, and this is a selector that we'll actually use in our page to select a list of filter musicians. So select list of musicians filtered by query that is entered here. This selector is created by composing select musicians selector that returns array of all musicians, and select query that returns current value of query. And then inside of the projector function, we can apply filtering logic in order to get filtered musicians. Yeah, the last thing is to see how we can create a container component and to merge all these things together. So in our case, we will create a musicians component, which will be a container component for musicians list page. It will use, of course, change detection on push. Because we can do this, we are safe because we are using immutable state updates. First thing that we want to do here is to inject store. So here I used inject function. We can also use constructor-based dependency injection if we want. Store is a service that is exposed by the NgRx store package. When our component is initialized, we want to dispatch opened action. We can do that by using store.dispatch method and pass the action as an input argument. What will happen under the hood? Our reducer will listen to this action and it will set isLoading flag to true. So loading spinner will be displayed here. The next action that we want to dispatch is when search button is clicked. So when search button is clicked, we will get the current value of query here. And then we can dispatch query changed action and pass a query as a payload of this action. Okay, the next thing is to create selectors to display, to visualize our state in the template. So the first selector that we need here is select filtered musician selector. As you can see here, we are using store.select method. So we are using dispatch method to dispatch actions and select method to select state slices from our NgRx store. And here we need to pass a selector as an input argument. This selector we previously created, if you remember, select filter musician. So this will return an observable that contains a list of filter musicians by query. Here we also need isLoading state slice and query state slice, so we can display isLoading flag every time when this observable emits true, and hide it every time when it emits false. For query, it's the same. We want to display here in this input the current value of query. I use standalone components here. For inputs, we would need async pipe to unwrap observable values in the template, and also two presentational components. I call them search box and musician list component. So here on the left side, you can see how musician component template will look like. We have title. After that, we use those two presentational components. First is app search box. It accepts a query, current value of query as an input. And to unwrap this observable, or to pass the current value that is emitted to this observable as an input of this component, we need to use async pipe. This component also has one output. It has search output. So when a search event is emitted, we want to call onSearch method from our component and pass a current value of query as an input argument. This method will further dispatch query changed action and pass query as a payload. The next presentational component is musician list. It has only two arguments. The first is list of musicians. As you can see here, we are again using async pipe, and the second one is loading flag. So we want to display loading spinner until we load this collection. Okay, so we talked about actions, reducers, selectors. We also saw how we can create a container component, but now the question is how to load this data from the API, right? And for that, we can use NgRx effects. As I told you in the beginning, NgRx package is used to define global side effects in our application in a reactive way. So yeah, to isolate side effects for cleaner component architecture and to handle side effects in a reactive way. If we go back to our diagram, here you can see we have right now one more building block. We have effect. Effects can also listen to actions, to dispatched action, do some side effect, perform some operation, and then potentially effect can also return an action as a result that will be further dispatched to the store. This new dispatched action can be handled by another effect, by another reducer, multiple reducers or effect based on our use case. So this flow will repeat over and over. Let's now see how we can create an effect that loads a musician list from the API when opened action is dispatched. So here we created musicians effect class, and first thing that we'll need here is to inject actions observable from the NgRx effects package. This observable will emit a new value, will emit a new action every time when some action is dispatched to our NgRx store. To create an effect, we are using create effect function that is part of the NgRx effects package public API. The name of the effect is load all musicians. By the way, it's always a good practice to name effects as functions. So what we need to do here, we will listen to the action stream. Then we will filter action stream by musicians page actions open, because we want to perform side effect only when opened action is dispatched, not when any action is dispatched. To filter action stream here, you can see we are using off type operator, RxJS operator, and pass action creator reference as an input argument. By the way, off type can also accept a sequence of actions, so we can perform the same side effect when multiple actions are dispatched. This is also possible. And off type is just the derived filter operator, derived RxJS filter operator. That's it. Next, we will use exhaust map operator. And then inside of the exhaust map, we will call musician service.getAll method that returns actually observable that sends HTTP call and returns musicians collection from the API. If our request succeeds, we will return, as a result of this effect, we will return musicians loaded success action and pass fetched musicians as a payload of this action. If something went wrong, we will catch the error and return musicians loaded failure action and potentially pass, like in this example here, error message as a payload. Let's now see how we can register effects. Again, we will use example for standalone application. So we can use provide effects function that is part of the NgRx effects API, and it accepts sequence or array. We can also pass effects in array of effect classes, as you can see here. What it will do under the hood, provide effects, will run effect manager mechanism. It will initialize our class. It will subscribe to all our effects that we define in our class, and it will every time when some of those effects return some action, it will dispatch that action back to the NgRx store. Okay, so these were the core principles, and this is how we defined our how we write logic for the global state management in the last few years, let's say. But since last few releases, we introduced several improvements that can help us primarily to reduce repetitive code in our Angular applications that use NgRx. The first API is Action Group Creator. So here in the beginning, we saw how we can create actions by using create action function. But it has some drawbacks. As you can see here, we always need to manually apply source event pattern. So we can easily, for example, if we copy the previous action, we can easily forget to change the action type, and we will have an error in our application. The next thing is we need to repeat the source for each action. So every time, for example, here I created musicians API actions.ts file. So all actions that are part of this file will have musicians API as a source, but we need to repeat it every time. One more thing here, action names are usually camel-cased version of the event name. So we can see our action name is musician loaded success in a camel case format. Our event name is musicians loaded success, let's say, in title case format. So we need to repeat this part as well. And when defining actions by using create action function, what we usually do, we create a borrow file, and there we export all actions from a specific file by using name export. So in all other components or effects where we need this action group, we can access by using this named export. On the other hand, with create action groups, we can solve problems that I previously mentioned. So we have the same example. We have musicians API actions.ts file, but this time instead of create action, we will use a new API called create action group. Create action group accepts a config object as an input argument that contains two required properties. The first of source of the action group, so we don't need to repeat it multiple times. In this case, source will be musicians API. And then after source, we need to specify dictionary of events. Each event is a key value pair of event name and event props or event payload. So in this case, we will only specify the event name. We don't need to manually apply source event pattern. It will be applied for us under the hood by the create action group function. And to define payload for a specific action, as you can see here, we are using the same function that we used before with create action function. It's called props. And then here, I just called those actions here to see how they are created. So create action group will return a dictionary of actions based on defined source and based on defined event dictionary. In this case, we define two events, so we will have two action creators. The first one is musicians loaded success. The second one is musicians loaded failure. As you can see, the action name is camel-cased version of the event name. And everything is strongly typed, of course. So this specific object will only contain those two properties. If we talk about action type, we will see later in a playground project that everything is strongly typed. So create action group will automatically apply for us source event pattern. We don't need to do this manually anymore. Another good thing is that by using create action group, we can reduce lines of code in our action file by almost 50%. So we can see on the left side, musicians API actions defined by using create action function. On the right side, we can see the same actions that are defined by using create action group function. The next relatively new feature, I believe it's available from version 12 point something, is a feature creator. So let's first see what is the NgRx feature. We can think of NgRx feature so for each feature state actually in our Angular application, we need to define a reducer. We also need to find a feature name to register that reducer to the NgRx store, and then we also need to define feature selector and selector for each feature state properties. So a lot of things, right? So we can call these three units as NgRx feature. So here we saw how we can create NgRx feature by creating reducer, by manually creating all the selectors. And now let's see how we can reduce some repetitive code, especially in selector files, by using create feature function. So on the left side, I renamed my musicians reducer.ts to musician state.ts. Here we still have our state type, we have initial state, and we have reducer that is created by using create reducer function. But I did one more thing here. I created a new object called musicians feature by using create feature function. This function also accepts a config object with two required properties. The first one is a feature name, and the second one is feature reducer. Musicians feature, so on the bottom you can see what will musicians feature object contain. So create feature object will return feature name and feature reducer that will previously passed, as we can see here, but it will also generate some selectors for us, so we don't need to do that manually anymore. It will generate a feature selector, in this case select musician state, and it will also generate selector for each feature state property. Select musician, select is loading, and select query. Everything is strongly typed, of course. Feature selector is generated, the name of feature selector is generated by using feature name and applying select prefix and state suffix. For the rest of selectors for each feature state property, we are using property names that are defined here in our feature state type. So what we can do right now, we can remove those selectors that we previously created manually. One thing left, actually, we have one derived selector here, select filter musicians, and we are also able to add derived selectors to our feature object by using this extra selectors property. This is relatively new. It's released, actually, maybe it's available from version 14 or in version 15, I'm not sure, we can check. But this property, this extra selectors is actually a factory. Inside of this factory, as an input argument, we can see we accept dictionary of feature selector and selector of each feature state property that is previously generated by the create feature. Then we can use them to create derived selectors here. So select filter musician selector is created in the same way as before by applying the same logic by using a create selector function. So now when we add extra selectors, musician feature object will also contain them. We can see it here. So now we can simply remove the entire musician selectors.ts file. Also, feature registration is a bit easier by using create feature function. We can pass the entire feature object to the provide state function, and musician's feature reducer will be registered to the NgRx store. We don't need to have named imports or exports anymore. The last thing that I want to show you today are functional effects. So previously we saw how we can create NgRx effects, but if you remember, we need to put them inside of the effect class. Fortunately, when Angular team published the new API inject function, we are now able to do dependency injection out of classes. So we came to idea and created this new feature, so we can now define effects in a file without using a class. We call them functional effects. So we are using still the same function. We are using create effect function, the same we use for the class-based effects. And here we still pass the effect factory function, but now here inside of the input arguments of this effect factory function, we can inject action stream, and we can also inject musician's service. By the way, we don't need to do this here. We can left this function, effect factory function, without arguments and use inject inside of the effect factory body. But this way is a bit better because we can easily test our effects. I believe we have as the next slide that by using this approach, we can easily pass mocked objects for actions, for musician service, for any other dependency, and we don't need to use testbed anymore. We can test functional effects as a plain functions. So the logic is the same here. So we are returning action stream. We are listening to opened action. When open action is dispatched, we want to fetch musicians from the API, and then based on the API response, we want to return success or failure action. To provide effects, to provide functional effects, we can see here in main TS, or in if we have lazy loaded features, we can still use provide effect function and pass a dictionary of events as an input argument. Of course, if we have multiple effect files, we can here pass a sequence of multiple effect dictionaries. To create effect dictionary from this file, we can simply use named import and pass this name import as an input argument of provide effects function. Yeah, as I mentioned, testing is much more easier. We can test, as you can see here, a load all musicians effect as a plain function. So we can pass actions mock and musician service mock as input arguments, and then apply some testing logic without using test bed. Source code of this application that we saw today on these slides is available at the following link. You can go to my GitHub profile, and there is a repository called NgRx Musicians app. I already opened this repository, so I'm not sure, Luciano or Emmanuel, if you have enough time, maybe we can quickly also walk through this.
Sure. Here we are.
Great.
Yeah, that's great.
Awesome.
Of course, thank you for the talk and sharing all the details with us. And so let's have a brief discussion, I guess, on NgRx and also, on your experience, right? So the first question.
I just wanted, if you agree, I just wanted to show some code this through the demo project. It will be maybe 5 minutes long.
Yes.
Okay.
No, that's cool. But if we can, before jumping into the code, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, before jumping into the code, just out of curiosity, why did you decided to join this project, right? And then we can jump on all the details. So we can help you pause a little bit after the presentation before jumping into the code. And then go into the technical stuff, okay?
Yeah, that's fine. So the question was how I joined the NgRx team, right?
No, why did you like to join it, right?
Yeah, because I used NgRx before. I liked it. I like the Redux pattern. I like unidirectional data flow that NgRx provides. I like to use RxJS to handle side effects. So NgRx was my choice for global state management for a long time. And then after some time, I started contributing. I first started with some documentation and then contributed more and more. And that's cool. How it started.
We will go back to how everything started later then. And let's deep dive into the code then. Cool.
Go, Marko.
So here is the new create action group function. We saw it on the slide. It returns a dictionary of action creators, and I just wanted to show you how it works. So we have here musicians API actions. Here we can see it generated musician loaded failure and musician loaded success actions. For example, this specific action we can see inside of the action type that source event pattern is automatically applied, so we don't need to apply it manually, and we can use action creators generated by created action group directly in our code. The next thing is feature creator. So this is here we have create feature function. As we saw previously, reducer is created in the same way as before by using create reducer function. And here we just need to pass a reducer as an input argument of this function. So this musician feature object, let's quickly inspect what's its structure. So it will contain, here we can say musician's feature dot. Here we have select musician state. This selector, this is a feature selector, so it will return the entire feature state object of musicians. As we can see here, the type is result is state. Then we also have select musicians, select is loading, and select query. For example, select query result, of course, will be a string. And here we also have select filter musician. It's also part of the musician feature object. So if I search for select musician, I can use it in our container component, in NgRx effects, everywhere where it's needed. So I just wanted to quickly show you those new features in action. And the next thing that we can also discuss, and people who are watching this can take a look, are our new RFCs. We have this RFC to integrate existing NgRx API with Angular Signal, and there is another RFC called NgRx Signal Store that suggests introducing a new state management solution that only uses Signal by default. Regarding the first one, here you can see that proposal is very simple. The idea is to have, instead of select method, along with select method, to have another method called select signal that has the same signature as select method. So it accepts a selector as the input argument, but instead of observable, it returns a signal. It's similar for component store. We would have, instead of this.select, we would have this.select signal here, and together with select signal, there will be also function. Let me try to find it. There will be also a state signal. So if we don't want, we don't need to use this.select signal to select our state slices as signals. We can use default Angular method function, computed, that is part of the Angular core API to create selectors for our state slices. Also, the plan is to integrate effect, updater, and patch state methods to accept signals, because currently, for example, effect can accept observable or static value, and this logic here will be re-executed if we pass observable, this logic will be re-executed. So side effect will be performed every time when specific observable that we previously passed emits a new value. We'll most likely have the same behavior with signals, so we'll be, for example, able to pass a signal to the getMovie function. So this function, this effect will be re-executed every time when signal value changes. Regarding NgRx signal store, it's a longer story. Here you have the full proposal. There is also a playground project. You can take a look. It's called NgRx signal store playground. So yeah, that's it. We can move to the Q&A section.
Yeah. So
Cool.
here we are.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marko.
And
My pleasure.
so before we were talking about, go ahead.
I want just to say, if you have any question, please write directly on YouTube or LinkedIn, and we are going to share with Marko in this session of Q&A.
So while questions come, let's start again. I think Luciano had the curiosity before, and we were talking about how you started.
Yeah.
So Luciano, go ahead.
I'm sure that a lot of people it's interested on contributor on contributing in open source library, but the first problem that each people is going to ask is how I can join in and contribute in some way. So how I can have a solid, strong knowledge on contributing on NgRx, for example.
Yeah, good question. First of all, we can contribute in many ways. Code contributions are not the only way. We can contribute to the open source project also on Discord by helping other people. We can contribute by finding bugs and opening issues, by answering questions, by writing documentation. So there are many ways. People usually, and I personally started with NgRx contributions with some small improvements, with documentation updates. And if you go to our NgRx platform repository, open issue section, you can search issues by good first issue label. And those issues are usually in the issue description. You can also find the solution. So they are a good way to start, to fork the NgRx repository, to play around with the project and to create a pull request. After that, of course, you can take more complex issues that are opened. We are always welcome for new contributors, of course.
Like a real world, no? If a junior developer join in a new company, so for sure start with a small task and try to complete it, no? So
that's true. And in general, I mean, you need to learn the project, and best way to learn the project is to start with simple things, then explore the code base, then move to more complex one. It's always a better way, regardless of seniority, in my opinion. But
no, that's true. So I do have a curiosity on my own, and I don't know if it's something that ever came out or not, but sometimes when people talk about NgRx, also they talk about immutability, right? And so sometimes I've seen around it with the use of some immutability libraries like Immer. I don't know if you have any suggestion or if you think it's a good approach or not, if you had first-hand experience. So can you share a little bit about it?
It's good to use Immer, especially when you have some deeply nested data, so you avoid infinite spreading operator usage. There is a package called NgRx Immer. It's created by another core team member, Tim DeShriver. So you can search for that package. There are functions for case reducer, for example, Immer on. I believe there is also create Immer reducer. So we can when we use, for example, create email reducer, we can apply mutable state updates inside of the email reducer, but they will be, of course, applied immutably. There is also integration for component store. It's called email component store. But yeah, you can open, you can search for NgRx email on GitHub, and there is fine document. It's good document, contains good documentation, description of APIs, and everything that we need.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. I mean, that was my curiosity. But in the meantime, we have a question from the audience. So the question is, how can we combine separated store, which is split with Angular module architecture? Yeah, that's the question coming from LinkedIn. Yeah.
What do you mean by how we can combine separated store? The idea with NgRx global state management is to have a single store in your application. So your store is a singleton. You don't have multiple stores.
Yeah, maybe it's if we have two functionality slice, maybe, and you have a tiered functionality and want to combine.
Oh yeah, maybe the question was how we can combine multiple feature states, right?
But maybe
that could be. Yeah.
In that case, we can still use create selector function and combine selectors that select different slices from different feature states. So that's also possible.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. We have also Giorgio and Davide here with us. I'm going to add to the conversation. So
cool.
Hello, guys.
Hi, guys.
Welcome.
Hello.
Welcome, Davide. Welcome, Giorgio.
Yeah.
First of all, thanks a lot, Marco, for the presentation. Very, very interesting.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my question was, it's all about the structure that you showed us for the effect, for example, that is going through a functional approach. So also we were speaking with Davide about all the changes that also Angular is making, for example, the ng storybook and etc. Which is your opinion in the direction that the Angular development is taking? It's more like something like a functional approach. It's like we are going to in a React direction, more or less.
Actually, yeah, I mean, it's obvious that Angular also goes towards functional style. With functional guards are introduced, class-based guards are deprecated. Also, signal APIs are more or less functional APIs.
Yeah.
And there was also a talk, I think you can check, there is on YouTube channel discussion with the community about Angular signals, and where Angular team members presented the RFC and also responded to a lot of questions. One of the questions was about potentially new authoring format. For now, we don't know anything about that, but the thing is, and what I like a lot about Angular is backwards compatibility. So with signals, we don't have breaking changes. We can still use zone-based components, for example, if we want. If something is deprecated, it's not like removed in the next version. It will most likely be here, be part of the Angular code base during the next few versions. So we have enough time to migrate everything to the latest features.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Marco.
You're welcome.
We have another question.
Davide, we cannot hear you.
Okay, let's go with the question from the live chat. So Zoran asks, what's the benefit of signal store?
What's the benefit of NgRx signal store proposal? Yeah, the thing is, NgRx signal store would use signals by default, so without internal observable to signal conversions. That's the first thing. And the second thing, if you take a look at the RFC, you can see that it uses functional approach instead of class-based. But yesterday I also realized it's available to use the current signal store, create signal store function to create a class, to create a store as a class. You can take a look at my latest Twitter post to learn more about it. But yeah, the thing is, with NgRx signal store, I tried to solve some limitations that I faced with class-based state management solutions such as NgRx component store. So the idea with signal store is to primarily use it for the local state management at the component level, the same as component store. On the other hand, with component store, so component store is a class. When we want to create a new store by using component store, we are usually extending component store, and this leads to some limitations. For example, we cannot combine multiple component store together because of single inheritance in JavaScript, right? And also some issue with classes is that they are not tree shakeable. For example, we create a component store, we only use patch state and select methods, but in our final bundle, we will also have effect, we will also have set state and all those methods that are part of the component store. By using NgRx signal store, the idea is to solve those limitations, to provide modular API, composable, tree shakeable, and to solve the limitations that we previously faced with other state management solutions. I hope that answers your question.
And what about testability?
Yeah.
What about?
The testing of the signal, NgRx signal store.
Yeah, I mean,
testing, I mean,
we will be able to test it in the same way as any other service. So that's the idea. RFC that doesn't contain any story about testing, but yeah, that will be added at some point of time.
Okay,
cool.
So using the approach with the signal and all the function that, as you said, are tree shakeable and etc. So we are going to have also some kind of advantages also in the bundle, the final bundled version of the application. So it's not just like rendering advantage for signal, etc. It's also something like more concrete on after the build.
Actually, the idea with signal store is not just to use, of course, to use signals to hold the state, but it also introduces some ways of thinking and creating stores in a different way compared to the classic class-based approach. Of course, I told you component store classes are not reshakeable. It's not a big deal, like to include, I don't know, component store methods that you are not using as a part of your final bundle. It's not that huge, but on the other hand, it can be very useful in some situations.
Right. So, David, did you have a question that you were trying before? We cannot hear you. But you can write if you want. You can write. You can be your voice. Yeah, that's fine. Otherwise, in the meantime, I have a very, very, very basic question, but I think it has been asked a lot of times, but maybe it's useful. So why we should prefer this approach, I mean, Redux approach and NgRx approach compared to, just having services and observables? I mean, theoretically, we can achieve similar results of, sharing status everywhere, but I mean, why we should not, or we should?
Yeah, because in my opinion, NgRx global state management solution better scales compared to traditional ways when we combine service with a subject. It provides more opinionated way to do things. We are splitting different components, different parts of our application into separate components or separate building blocks. we are isolating, so we have single responsibility. We have side effects. On one side, we have reducer that only does state updates. We have, on the other hand, selectors that are responsible for selecting our data. So for more complex applications, in my opinion, NgRx is much better.
Yeah. Cool. No, I tend to see, different architecture where the people thinks in a more, feature-based or vertical way, and so there is, the tendency not to share stuff or not to take, not to have too many ways of splitting the data everywhere, and then you can see these very, very big objects going or flying around, and then you can lose easily track of who is changing what. And
that's a good point, and that's also the reason why NgRx is good. On the other hand, NgRx also provides the ability to use Chrome DevTools extension, so we can easily debug our application, but by tracking what actions are dispatched, what is changed in our state. On the other hand, it's not a good practice to put everything, all state slices, as a part of the NgRx store.
What?
The idea with NgRx store is to use it for the global state management. So to put only the global state slices as a part of our global state. For local state, we can go with NgRx component store, for example, and use it for that purpose.
Yeah, cool.
Maybe you hear me now.
Yes.
Finally.
Welcome.
Welcome,
Yeah.
David.
Yeah. Okay, so Marco, thank you, because I was thank you before, but you was not hearing me. My question is about it's a more generic topic about NgRx. If there is a pattern that you suggest in creating the state, because sometimes I see that someone create the state based on entities, or sometimes some developers create the state based on the feature. So maybe regarding the information that are needed for the UI mostly, instead of just the entity itself. So I don't know if there is something like a pattern that you suggest.
So you said some developers create NgRx global state based on page structure, like feature structure.
Yeah.
That's a bad practice, in my opinion, and it can also lead to some replicated that data. So we will have same data twice, for example, somewhere in our NgRx store. We will most likely in that case also store things that are not needed, that are not really a global state, that needs to be, for example, cleaned up when a specific container component is destroyed. So yeah, I don't think it's a good approach to project NgRx state as per page. We can think of NgRx store as a database on the front end, and project it in the same way.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So, in your opinion, it is more useful to have an entity approach and share the same information across the whole application in order to avoid duplicates, because we are, for example, managing the same data for different pages. So, as far as I understood, this is the direction that you prefer while structure a state management. That's correct?
Yeah, for the global state management for NgRx store, it's always good to organize your store by your data, like in the database. But on the other hand, if you have local state, you want to use NgRx component store, of course, you can organize your local state based on the specific container component. So in that case, but organizing a state based on pages inside of the global store is not a good practice, in my opinion.
Okay.
A lot.
So thanks, Marco. As the
Thank you
last
very much,
thing,
guys.
we are going to
it was a pleasure.
give away 2 licenses of JetBrains license. So just write in the comment if you want to use a JetBrains license, and we're going to contact you in private. Okay.
Yeah. First come, first serve. Yeah.
Yes. So thank you again, Marco. It's a pleasure to have you in our meetup, and see you in Rome.
See you in Rome this year, I hope. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
thank you. Bye.